values, the Scrum roles, events, and also the Scrum artifacts. I'm going to go through each of them and try to define them to you, and then, sorry. Actually, I want to tell you that at the end of the presentation, as well as the others, there will be a questions answers section. And let's do that, guys. First, what is Scrum? Well, Scrum is actually the most widely used and popular Agile framework, as you might already know. Well, the term Agile describes a specific set of fundamental principles and values for organizing and managing complex work. Let's call it this way. Though its roots in software development, actually today Scrum refers to a lightweight framework that is also used in every industry in order to deliver complex, innovative products and also services. It's not only for software development. The Scrum is simple to understand, but yet it is very difficult to master with all its values and principles. Just before we begin, let's differentiate between the Scrum and the Agile. Well, the Agile refers to the set of principles and values that are shared by several methodologies, actually, and also several processes and practices, while the Scrum is only one of those several Agile frameworks. So let's talk about the Scrum framework and see what it is about. But as I said at the beginning of the presentation, let's see first what is a sprint. Since I'm going to be talking a lot about sprints, so it is preferable that we define it right now before getting into the thing. Well, the Scrum teams, actually, they work in short time frames. Those time frames, they are called sprints. Well, sprints can be actually as short as 1 week, and they can also be as long as 1 calendar month. So a sprint, it can be 1 week, 2 weeks, or a 3 weeks time frame. The sprints, they happen one right after the other without any breaks, actually, so that we can maintain a steady project cadence. Well, each sprint begins with a plan, and it ends with a review of the work that has been completed during that sprint. And in the additional of this review of work, there is a review of the way in which the teams or the Scrum team had worked together. Now that we know pretty much what is the sprint, we can go through the framework. Well, guys, here is an overview of the Scrum framework. The sprint, actually, it begins with a planning. As I said, it is a sprint planning. We'll be talking about it later, where the team defines the sprint backlog, which is actually a list of what should be done during this sprint in order to achieve some defined goal. Every day of the sprint, the team they meet in a daily Scrum to discuss their progress or to discuss the progress towards the goal. At the end of the sprint, actually an increment must be released. At the end of each sprint, they have to release some increments. I'll be talking about increments and what is it later. And the overall work gets reviewed at the very end of the sprint. And also there is a sprint retrospective. As I said, that is a review of the way that the work has been done. Well, the whole process, actually, it goes over and over again. After the end of the sprint, directly another sprint begins, and it goes that way. Well, that is pretty much the Scrum framework. And in the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be talking about each element of this framework in a little bit more of details. Well, let's start with the Scrum values. Before getting through the elements, let's see what are the 5 values that should be respected in Scrum. And we'll also see what do they mean in very short time so that we don't lose time. Well, here are the 5 values of the Scrum. Let's see first the commitment, for example. Well, the commitment, it means that the Scrum team must commit to achieving its goals and to supporting the other team members. Next, we have for example, let's take the focus. What does the focus mean? It means that the Scrum team's primary focus is on the work of the sprint. So we should all focus on the work of this sprint so that we make the best possible progress towards these goals. Then we have openness. Openness, it's when the Scrum team and also the stakeholders, not only the Scrum team, they should all be open to each other about work and about all the challenges during the working on the project. Next, we have respect. The respect, it means that Scrum teams, they must respect each other, of course, and also they must respect that each one of the team is capable and it is independent. And also they must respect that as such by people with whom they work. Last, we have courage. Well, the Scrum team members should really have the courage to do the right thing, to work on tough problems. Well, those were pretty much the 5 values of the Scrum. Now we can get through the Scrum team, the elements of the Scrum team, the events, and also the artifacts. Let's start with the Scrum team. Well, actually, the Scrum team is a fundamental unit, which is a small team of people. It actually consists of first, of course, the Scrum Master. Then we have the product owner and the developers. Well, if we are talking about software development, here is the Scrum team. Well, within a Scrum team, there are no sub-teams or hierarchies. Everyone is equal. Just everyone, they have their own role, but no one is the other's boss. This is pretty much the agility. Well, it is a cohesive unit of professionals. They focus on one objective at a time, which is the product goal. So everyone is working in order to achieve one goal. So there is no me or you, there is one team. And also when we evaluate the teamwork, we evaluate it as one unit and we don't evaluate each person from the other. Well, as I've been saying, the Scrum teams are actually cross-functional. It means that the members do need to have the skills necessary to create value each sprint. That the team is evaluated as one unit doesn't mean that some people, they can get, I don't know, lazy or something. And also they should be self-managing. Each one should manage itself and shouldn't depend to anyone else. Well, typically a Scrum team shouldn't be more than 10 people. It's 10 people or fewer in general. Well, let's go through each one of the team. Let's start with the Scrum Master, the most popular, if you want. So the Scrum Master is actually the person accountable for establishing Scrum as defined in the Scrum Guide. He is not the boss, he is not the head of the team, he is nothing. Maybe we can say he is the lead. He is some kind of the lead who serves the Scrum team and serves also the larger organization, but he is not the boss. Well, he is, as I said, accountable for establishing Scrum, as it is defined in the Scrum Guide. So they do this, or the Scrum Master do this by helping everyone in the team understand the Scrum theory and also the practice, well, both within the Scrum team and also the organization, as I said. By organization, I mean every unit that communicates with the team or that the team needs in order to achieve the goal. Also, the Scrum Master is actually accountable for the Scrum team's effectiveness. He is not only accountable to establish Scrum, but also he needs to make sure that the team as a unit is effective. So they do this by enabling the Scrum team to improve its practices, always within the Scrum team, the Scrum framework, sorry. So this was pretty much the Scrum Master. And then we have the product owner, or the PO. The PO actually is one person. He never is a committee, and he may represent the needs of the stakeholders. What I want to say actually that the product owner is the person that comes between the developers or the Scrum team and the stakeholders or the clients. Well, those wanting to change the product backlog can do so by only trying to convince the product owner. So the product owner, it has complete control of the product backlog. What is the product owner is accountable for is actually to maximize the value of the product. How? It's by resulting from the work of the Scrum team. So how this may be done is widely varying across the organization. The important is he should really maximize the value of the product. The product owner, he has the ability actually to delegate the responsibility to others, but still he really is the one accountable for it. Also, for a product owner to succeed, the entire organization must respect and answer his decisions. Well, this, guys, was pretty much the product owner. What's the next element of the Scrum team? We have the developers. Well, let's see. Obviously, the developers are actually the people in the Scrum team that are not the Scrum Master and not the product owner, and they are committed to creating any aspects of a usable increment each sprint. They are the people who actually work on the project or work in order to achieve the goal. In some cases, actually, one developer can also be a Scrum Master at the same time, but only if they make sure that he has less work as a developer to do, so that he can focus on his work as a Scrum Master. Okay, so those were the Scrum team. We have built the product, the Scrum events. The first event in the Scrum, it is the Scrum, the sprint planning. As I said before, if you remember, guys, I said that a sprint, it always began with a plan and ends with a review. Well, here's the plan. That's the sprint. By laying out the work to be performed for that sprint. So this resulting plan is created by the collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. It's not the Scrum Master or the product owner or some developer or stakeholders actually ensures that the item it's kind of an open event. They can invite them to attend the sprint planning and maybe provide advice or something. So in the sprint planning, there are 3 topics that should be addressed. First is, why is this sprint valuable? Next, it's what can be done in this sprint. And finally, the third topic is, how will the chosen work get done? Those are the 3 points that are most of all discussed in the sprint plan. So the sprint goal and the product's backlog items are selected for the sprint, and also the plan for delivering those items are together referred to as the sprint backlog. Okay. I really want to say that the sprint planning is mostly actually time boxed to a maximum of 8 hours, if the sprint is 1 calendar month, okay? And in most of the cases, it's a 2 to 3 hours appointment. Well, then the next event we have is the daily scrum or the stand-up meeting. Well, the purpose of the daily scrum, which is actually a 15 minutes event because it's done every day, so it can be longer. The purpose it is to inspect progress toward the sprint goal and to adapt the sprint backlog as necessary, or let's say to adjust the upcoming planned work, okay? One more thing is that this daily scrum has actually in many cases become a report meeting of where each participant assists with the idea of providing that they are working. So everyone comes and say, here's what I have done, here's what I'm going to do today. So actually it's not just that, but the goal of the daily scrum is to know whether or not we will reach the sprint goal at the end of the sprint. It's to see or to evaluate the progress of the team, okay, in a very quick way. Then we have the sprint review. I've been talking about the sprint review is the event that is done to review the work that has been done in the sprint, or that has the purpose of inspecting the outcome of the sprint and to determine the future adaptations to the product goal or to the ways of work. So the Scrum team, they present the results to their work, to the key stakeholders, and also the progress towards the product goal that has been discussed before. So during this event, the Scrum team and the stakeholders review what was accomplished in the sprint and what has changed in their environment, okay? So I'll say it one more time. The sprint review is pretty much a meeting to review and to evaluate what has been done as a work on the sprint. Next, we have the sprint retrospective. Well, in this meeting, actually, we also do evaluate, but not the work itself, but the way that it has been done. And actually, it is to plan other ways to increase the quality and the effectiveness of the team. Well, what's done in this event or in this meeting? The Scrum team, they inspect how the last sprint went with regards to individuals. Everyone expresses themselves, okay? So we'll see what has been done, what the interactions that has been done, the processes, and also the tools, and also the definitions of them. So the Scrum team, they discuss what went well during the sprint. They say this was very good, this was a very good thing done by Flan, etc. And then they also discuss what problems has been encountered during this sprint. And then they discuss how those problems that has been encountered could be solved. Let's call them I don't know how do we call this, but we try to find ways to solve those problems who has been encountered during the sprint. So this is pretty much why the sprint retrospective is done. Well, those were the main, or actually all the events that should be done in the sprint. Next, we will see the sprint artifacts. It's actually the last section we'll be seeing together, but it's the most important. Let's make it the most important, okay? Which is the sprint artifacts. Actually, it represents work or value. It's the work or value of the Scrum, okay? The artifacts, they are designed to maximize transparency of key information, okay? Thus, everyone inspecting them has the same basis for adaptation. So each artifact contains a commitment to ensure that it provides information that enhances the transparency we've been talking about, and also to focus against which progress can be measured. Well, the commitments I'm talking about, for example, as artifacts, we'll be talking about the product backlog, and the commitment for that is the product goal. So we have a product backlog. We'll evaluate how it's done and how it's going by putting a product goal into the frame. Next, we'll be talking about the sprint backlog, which has a sprint goal as a commitment. And last, the increment, which has a definition of done as a commitment. First, let's see the products backlog. Well, the products backlog is emergent. Let's call it emergent, and it is an ordered list of what is needed to improve the products, overall products. We're not talking about sprints here, okay? It is the single source of work undertaken by the Scrum team. Well, for the Scrum team to get to work, they need a product backlog. Well, the items of that product backlog, they can be done by the Scrum team within one sprint. They are deemed actually ready for selection in the sprint planning event. They usually acquire this degree of transparency after refining activities. Well, the products backlog refinement is the act of breaking down and further defining the products backlog items. So we get them into smaller, more precise items, okay? This is an ongoing activity to add details such as description, order, and size to the items. And the attributes often vary within the domain of work or the product itself. Well, the developers who will be doing the work are actually responsible for the sizing. The product owner may influence the developer by helping them understand and select the trails. I've been talking about the commitment. The commitment of the product backlog is the product goal. Well, what is the product goal? It is actually describing a future state of the product, which can serve as a target for the Scrum team to plan against. Okay, it's like the goal, the main goal. Well, it is actually in the product backlog. So the rest of the product backlog emerges to define the what, which will fulfill the product goal. Okay. Here's pretty much the product backlog and its commitment. Let's move next to the sprint backlog and the sprint goal. Well, the sprint backlog, it's actually composed of the sprint goal, the why. Why are we doing this sprint? Why are we going through this sprint? And the set of the products backlog items selected from the sprint, okay? So we take the products backlog, which is a set of a lot of items, which is a list. We take some of them and we define them as a sprint backlog, okay? As well as actually an actionable plan for delivering the increment. The increment is the question how to do it. Well, the sprint backlog is actually a plan by and for the developers. The developers are the ones who plan the sprint backlog, and they are the ones who execute it. Okay, it is a highly visible, real-time picture of the work that the developers plan to accomplish during the sprint in order to achieve the sprint goal. Okay, so consequently, the sprint backlog is updated throughout the sprint as the developers learn. It should actually have enough details that they can inspect their progress in the daily Scrum or in the stand-up meetings. Also, we're gonna talk about the commitment of the sprint backlog, which is the sprint goal. It's pretty much the same thing as the product goal, but this time it's for the sprint backlog. Well, the sprint goal, it's the single objective of the sprint. It's the goal of the sprint. Why what are we going to be through this sprint is to achieve some goal. Okay, so although the sprint goal is a commitment by the developers, it actually provides a flexibility in terms of the exact work needed to be achieved. Okay, so the sprint goal also creates coherence and focus. It also encourages the Scrum team to work together rather than to work in separate initiatives. Okay. Also, the sprint goal is created during the sprint planning, as I already mentioned, and then we can add to the sprint backlog. Okay, so as the developers work during the sprint, they keep the sprint goal in mind. If the work turns out to be different than they expected, they collaborate with the product owner to negotiate the scope of the sprint backlog. This can be done within the sprint. Okay, without affecting the sprint goal. So this was pretty much the sprint goal and the sprint backlog. Now we have the last artifact that we're going to talk about, which is the increment. Actually, an increment is a concrete stepping stone towards the product goal. Okay. And as I already mentioned, a sprint, at the end of a sprint, we have to release an increment. Well, each increment is additive to all prior increments and throughoutly verified. Okay, so ensuring that all increments they work together in order to provide value to the product. So multiple increments they might be created within a sprint, but at least one increment should be, as I said, released in the end of the sprint. So the sum of the increment is presented as the sprint review, thus supporting empiricism. Okay. Still, an increment may be delivered to stakeholders prior to the end of the sprint. The sprint review should never be considered a gate to releasing value. Okay. Even if we need to release an increment or more in the end of the sprint. What I also wanted to say, yes, the commitment. Well, an increment, as any of the other artifacts, it has a commitment itself, which is the definition of done. Well, the definition of done is actually a formal description of the state of the increment when it meets the quality measure required for the product. Let's say the moment a product backlog item meets the definition of done, the increment is born. Okay, so the definition of done creates transparency by providing everyone a shared understanding of what work was completed as part of the increment. Well, the developers are required to conform to the definition of done. Mostly it is defined by them in the sprint planning. Okay, so if there are multiple Scrum teams working together on a product, they must mutually define and comply within the same definition of that. I think that would be on about the increment and the Scrum artifacts. Let's just take a little breath back and see what have we talked about in this presentation. First, it was the Scrum framework. Then we have talked about the Scrum team, the Scrum event, and the Scrum artifacts. I think that this should be all for this presentation. Thank you all for your attention and welcome to your questions. Shiraz?
Yeah, Sanaa.
Do we have any questions? I guess we do have one.
Yeah, in the chat box.
Yes, first, thank you, Ms. Sana, for this rich talk. Thank you very much. I truly appreciate it. Well, I have two questions, if you don't mind. No, I don't. Do we can run 2 sprints in the meanwhile? Actually, no, we cannot. as I said, a sprint is a how do I say, an exclusive event. One sprint comes right after the other. We can do 2 sprints at the same time, unless you are working at 2 different teams, and which is not really possible. Then we have another question: do the product owner attend the daily meetings? Actually, they do attend the daily meetings, but they don't really have to. Okay, so it's not an obligation for them, but they do attend the daily meetings if they want to. Any other questions?
No.
Okay,
And,
you're welcome.
thank you, Miss Sana, for the amazing session.
Thank you, guys.
ويعطيك الصحة اللي قبلت تكون معنا اليوم.
Merci
استفدنا
beaucoup.
برشا، وميرسي الناس الكل اللي حضرتوا معنا. كانت هذه آخر سيشن لينا في الجريت مغرب ديزاين ويك. تويك باش نشاري معكم الفيدباك. نتمنى الناس الكل تعملوا الفيدباك باش توصلكم السيرتيف نتاعكم. فرحانين برشا اللي كنا معاكم 3 أيام هذوما. تعلمنا برشا حاجات واستفدنا برشا وتعرفنا على برشا ناس. ان شاء الله باش يكون عندنا زاده هاكاثون في السيمين اللي جايه، باش يكون فيه نفس التيم ونفس الناس. نتمنى تحضروا الناس الكل وباش تستفادوا برشا، ويعطيكم الصحه الناس الكل.